Okay, the red dot's on. It's going.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Endeavour, for coming to GrantTree Fundamentals. This week we're talking about leaving. Just a reminder that this is all about defining the kind of meta-structures of the business, the stuff that holds our culture that isn't directly related to the way that we do the work, but rather kind of the way that we operate the business. And getting these structures right is really important because that helps the kind of culture that we want to have arise. The key principles that all of this is built on, that everything that we do should be built on, are the principles of trust. We believe that people are worthy of trust, that they are motivated, people are fundamentally good, well-intentioned. We believe that everyone should have power and, of course, responsibility, because responsibility is the correlate of power. You can't have one without the other. And we believe that people should be free from violence and coercion. Last week we were talking about the decision to remove the trust-fail decision from the end of the probationary period, which has had various names over its history at GrantTree. And a question was raised about, well, how was dismissal going to work if we were going to do that? And that was very important to have defined. So we said last week that we would do that, and that's what we've gone away and done. So in order to define what the dismissal process should look like, we thought about a number of things. We thought about how we would want to be treated. We thought about how we would want to be able to say that we treated other people if they were dismissed. You know, we'd want to be able to hold our heads up and feel that we were proud of our behaviour. We looked at what other open culture companies do so that we weren't reinventing the wheel. And we also looked at those key principles of open culture, freedom, trust and power, and thought about how we could work to strengthen those with our process. So the key part of the proposal is that only Dan, as the founder, will have the power to dismiss people. So that's a kind of reserve power. That's a model that exists in other open culture businesses. Brooksorg do that, Morningstar do that. And that seems to make sense, that we have one person who's the kind of guardian of that last resort. And it should be a last resort. Anybody can request that he use this power, but it should never come as a surprise to anybody. We're aware that with the decisions that have been happening at the end of trust building periods, it sometimes has come as a surprise to people that things aren't going well. And that's not okay, right? That's an error. And the fact that that's been happening means that we need to rethink our structures and we need to start getting that right. For me, this is what we think the process looks like. It begins with honesty. It begins with kind of informal feedback and letting the person try and fix the problem. And do remember that there's always support available for feedback, from other colleagues, from me, from Wede, from Dan, from Hal, from everybody across the business. So if you're working with someone and you see that there's a problem, but you don't know how to have that discussion constructively with them, there's the feedback resources. But sometimes if you're thinking, maybe it's straightforward to give someone feedback about a competence issue, there's this particular part of your role that you have a clear problem with that you can overcome by doing some learning or doing something differently. But if it's like a kind of mindset, self-management issue, it's maybe more complicated to work out how to give that feedback constructively in terms of behaviours and actions, rather than making it a sort of character attack. So do go away and use other people as a sounding board. Do use people to facilitate that conversation to help you have that dialogue in a productive way.
It's worth elaborating on this and saying that usually where it becomes very difficult to give feedback is usually when a simple thing is happening, when you start to believe that the person is failing to perform because of some part of their identity, not because of some behavior that they have that they can change, but because of who they are. Maybe they're not switched on enough, maybe they're just not hardworking enough, maybe they're not have integrity, but some kind of feature of the person becomes the reason why you think they're not performing. And when you're in that mindset, it's very, very difficult to give either honest feedback or any kind of actually useful mentoring. So I think where the asking somebody else to help you formulate the feedback can really help is to help transition and try and identify what are the actual behaviors that you're observing that are problematic, and therefore what can you request from the person to change. Because if you go to somebody and say, well, I think you're just not smart enough, there's not a lot they can do about that. If you say, well, I think you need to be quicker at doing these tasks because it's taking too long, that's something they can work on. But if, I don't know if you see that, there's this transition when you go from identity to behaviors, where it becomes suddenly actually possible to help people, and that's a really important transition to genuinely try to help somebody.
I think it's really important, the idea of having the intention to help. We talk about the principle of trust, and a few weeks ago, remember, we talked about theory Y, the kind of approach where it says people are good intention. This process works on the basis that we assume that people are well-intentioned, that nobody is maliciously not doing their role, and that they can be helped, and that we should want to try and help them. So there's a sort of an informal process, you're talking to the person about it, but the issue isn't working. What happens then? So then we move into a formal process, and really the important thing about that is that it's clear to people that the formal process has started. Right, that's best practice around any kind of, what it's traditionally called performance improvement or dismissal program, whatever jargon we want to stick on it. It's important that the person who's having the problem understands that the problem is serious and understands that they're in this process to try and fix it. So the first stage of that is focused mentoring with you. You see the problem, you go to the person and you say, okay, I've given you some feedback on this, it's still not happening, it's kind of critical to your role, so the fact that you're not doing that means that you can't do the role. I'm now going to work with you for a period of time to mentor you, to help you improve. Now, exactly what focus means, how often that contact is, how you do it is, it's up to you. But you do need to, at the end of that process, come to Dan if the problem hasn't been resolved and say, this is what I've done, and he's going to have quite a high standard to say, have you done everything that's reasonable to help this person improve? Now, if you have done and it hasn't worked, then he will also put in some time to mentor that person to try and fix the issue. And it's only if that doesn't work that we come to the final stage. So the kind of flow chart looks like this, right? We have some period of mentoring, and the ideal is that somebody, through the mentoring, finds their sweet spot in the business. They start to do excellent work, they start to do fulfilling work. Alternatively, it's just not going to work out. If it doesn't work out, it's ideal that they would choose to leave, and that they would say, actually I could see that this isn't quite the right place for me. If they don't choose to leave and it's still not working out, then obviously we have the last resource, which is they're asked to leave. And I just wanted to point out, this looks like a diagram that you've seen already a number of times before, which is, this is how you find the stuff to work on the GrantTree. You can change the stuff that you're doing here to kind of try and find the right place, or you can go somewhere else. And none of these options are better or worse than others. We should have a mindset that if the ending is that somebody has to leave, it's not a failure, it's just this wasn't the right place for them at this particular moment in time. Now, a key question is, I said you have to work with the person for a period of time to mentor them. How long should you work with them? Well, our thinking is that the length of time that you work with them should be proportionate to the length of time they've been in the company. Right? The longer that you've had a relationship with someone, the stronger that relationship is, the more that you owe them to fix that relationship if things aren't going wrong. So our proposal is that in the first 6 months of the company, it's a period of 1 month mentoring from you and 1 from Dan. That rises to 1.5 from each person from 6 months to a year, 2 from each person up to 2 years, and then after 2 years, 3 from each person. Feedback on those time periods, very welcome. That's sort of what feels about right, to my gut instinct, but obviously we have to tweak that and get that right. And when I was talking to people about this yesterday, someone said, well, why is there this phase with Dan mentoring? What's the purpose of that? And there are a couple of things. For me, the first thing and the most important thing is that Dan is the founder, and it seems right that the buck should stop with the founder on issues of dismissal. It's kind of the most serious interaction the company is going to have with somebody, so it feels important that it's looked after by someone who has a kind of special status. Dan's also an experienced mentor. He's helped a lot of people who joined the business and maybe haven't quite found their feet, get into the right place and start achieving. It's also good, I think, to have that backup phase, because if you're getting mentoring from someone in your team, if maybe one of the things that means that you're not performing is that you're having some kind of interpersonal issues with your team members, if the person who's coaching you is someone who you're not really getting on with, it may be useful to have somebody else who can step in. Dan's also probably going to be more open-minded about which of the solutions is right, including saying, look, maybe this isn't the right place for you, and if it isn't, how can we support you find where the right place is and transition? Because he's going to be a little bit further away from the issue. And also, this then creates a two-step process. And ACAS guidelines are that there should be a two-step process so that people have kind of two opportunities. So we're satisfying best practice as well by doing it.
Yes, a legal best practices. So when we talk to the lawyer, they will say, well, your process is very fine and dandy, but it's actually illegal, which would suck, obviously.
We talked last week about the fact that leaving and joining and hiring and all of these things are kind of linked together, and I think that's still the case, and I just want to restate that to get leaving right, we have to keep, as we are doing, working on our hiring. We also have to work on the joining process, making it clear to people what we expect from them, helping them educate themselves around communication so that they can receive constant feedback so they're less likely to run into trouble. And we need to be offering them continuous feedback. So none of that's news, but I just felt it was worth reminding us. And I kind of finally want to point out that the interesting thing about this solution is when we started thinking about the dismissal process, you know, it sounds like something kind of dry, it's never going to happen, and you're building this exceptional process that you're never going to use. And actually what we've ended up doing is saying, well, because we want to never really get to the point where we are asking someone to leave, we're going to put in place this thing which says you have to give people feedback, and if they're not responding to the feedback, you have to give them focused mentoring. And we're actually creating, I think, a more caring and nurturing workplace in that way, because we're making ourselves more responsible for each other's excellence and fulfillment. And that seems to be how and why open culture should exist.
I'd actually explain it slightly differently, right? So if you read about open culture, about how they handle dismissals, you see a kind of paradox there, where they just state like, oh, people rarely get dismissed in open cultures, and they don't really explain why. And they say about themselves. And if you, that seems like a conundrum, because, you know, we want that, but how do you get there? And I think what is not in my belief there is that the point where you have a strong enough relationship with people that they actually do live by themselves is when they genuinely understand that you care for them and you really try to help them, you really try to make a really good effort to try and help them find a good place, and there just wasn't really the right kind of place for them in the company. So it's kind of with the commitment from the company to go and help the person to find the right place and to increase their skills, to meet their expectations, that you get also the equal commitment from the other side that if they don't find the right place, they will probably leave by themselves. So there's a kind of paradox there, which we'll see unfold in practice, hopefully not too often, as we apply this.
I think it's worth also saying that, you know, if we're saying, okay, we're going to make sure that we're supporting people more, that is more work, right? That is more effort that we have to put in. But I think it's worth saying that that's, you know, that's not like stuff that you do that's kind of quote unquote on top of your work. That's part of your work. So, you know, if you have somebody joining your team, factor in the fact that you're going to have to start maybe giving them some more time to give them a bit more regular, constant feedback in the early days, and manage your own expectations about how much of the rest of your commitments you're going to be able to do. You know, don't put yourself in a position where, because people are joining your team, suddenly you're, you know, having to work until midnight every day. That's not going to be healthy. Yeah, that's our presentation. Questions, discussions.
Quick question. I didn't catch the time scales of mentoring. Can you get that back up?
Yeah. I think it was 1 month for the first 6 months, 1 plus 1. Yeah. 1.5 plus 1.5 for the next 6 months, 2 plus 2, and then, for the next year, and then 3 plus 3 after 2 years.
Why, when you've been here longer and should be better at your job, do you get more time to improve?
I think the rationale is my thinking about this, but it's a fair question to ask. My rationale is that, you know, when we've known somebody longer, we've invested so much more into building a mutual relationship. They kind of earn the right to have more effort spent on helping fix things if things aren't working out suddenly. That's my rationale. I don't think it's.
I know what you're saying, and I agree. I think you do invest time. My worry would be is if if somebody's in a senior role and they're taking 2 months to sort themselves out, that's a huge cost to the company, but also it shouldn't be happening. You've got a bigger problem at that point. That is a countlessly bigger problem.
So your issue is with the timeline rather than the principle?
Yes, I think that is there's a lot more to address on that. If you've got like a senior member of staff who you've got to mentor for 2 months,
6 months.
6 months. 6 months. That's basically 50% of their salary where they could just drag their heels.
No, I totally hear you, and I agree. Like it feels. So I think what you're saying is it feels kind of arbitrary, a bit too long.
It's a bit. Surely the learning curve is much greater at the beginning than towards the end. Surely all you're doing is tweaking. You've got a well-oiled machine and they're online. It's just small individual.
I think what it is, Don, what I see your point. I think what they try to do is like we've got a bigger commitment to say Greenie, who's been here 2 years, than to somebody who's just like joined. As in, if they've delivered a certain amount of value to the company, we've got a bigger commitment to help them out. But I see your point.
You've got commitment to everybody in the room. That's what I find we keep forgetting. Which is, so if you give them 6 months, like if Greenie goes off the beaten path, I don't know if it's Greenie in the office, but if Greenie goes off the beaten path, what we're talking about, maybe she's finished her role, and maybe we're looking for a new role for her. And if there isn't one, then maybe that's where you pass end. We don't. I don't think we've really thought about when you're a senior member of staff, you should be tweaking or just keeping things plate spinning. You shouldn't have to look for a complete reinvention, which is a 6-month project.
I hear you. I think so to me the 3+3 makes sense because I tend to be quite generous with my time. That's maybe my overly generous side coming through. It also based on the way it happens in larger organizations, they tend to have about 6 months as a kind of rule of thumb for how long they spend on a performance improvement program, which is what they call those things, which aren't really performance improvement programs, but basically they're like, the disciplinary process. A large company takes 6 months. That doesn't mean that it should take 6 months in our case. So I don't know. Like I think we need to decide on some kind of length of time. It felt to me right that it should increase. I don't know. Like you make a good argument there.
I think
it could be flat.
I'm struggling with the like sort of concrete rules and things like that. It just feels your learning curve when you join a company is, and we all know this from people coming in, is a greater learning curve. Now, once you're immersed in the company, you've got the weight of your knowledge.
Do you feel they should go in this direction?
I think they should go in that direction, as in, if you're not pulling your weight, there is this. Obviously, there is a room for leniencies in finding roles, but I think if you are, that is how your learning curve would go in any company or any situation.
That's a fair point. So do you think it should be flat, or do you think it should be decreasing over time? Or?
I think it should be decreasing over time.
Okay.
I think there needs to be 2 overlaps on what you can offer.
I think it's multiple questions.
Will was first.
I think you can make a really solid argument either way, which perhaps means it should be flat. But and of course context specific. Depends on the nature of the problem. But I mean that's it. I think you can make a good argument either way. But yeah, that's it.
Paul, did you actually have a question?
Yes, I did have a question. So, what standards will we have for judging that people have actually improved after this 2 to 6 months? So, how will we actually measure it? They have improved, and how will we measure it that improvement is not temporary? So, it's a temporary kind of swing because they feel they're losing their role, but it's something that they've actually recovered their commitment and their kind of passion for what they're doing. So that's the kind of the slight problem I can see how we're gonna. Of course, it's gut and all that, but how are we gonna tell after 6 months is this person actually improved? Are we gonna give them a test? Are we gonna?
So from my like, I hear your concern. So like how do we tell whether they should be going on to the next phase of mentoring or being asked to leave, or whether they've improved?
And also after the final phase of mentoring, how do you tell basically whether this is an improvement or it's not? How do we gauge an improvement? Because that's...
So my experience when I've done this in the past has been that I could tell, because I could see that the person had picked up the stuff that I was trying to teach them. Or in some, but there was a case of somebody where I did help them significantly over a period of weeks, and then let them off onto their own, and they lost those skills again. They stopped being diligent at the stuff that I taught them.
So maybe there should be a kind of a rule, a guideline that if that's what happens, that they pick it up but then lose it, then that means they're out as
go
well.
into the process again. Yes.
It would be.
I don't think it would be fair to give them 6 months, let's say, they keep it for 2 weeks, lose it, and then give them another 6 months. I think that's just completely ridiculous and it's unsustainable as well.
It would be fairly standard practice to say, you know, if you've gone through this phase, if the problem is fixed, if it recurs again within, you know, the next year, then you rejoin the process at this point.
Yeah.
That would be standard practice, and that seems to me to be fair.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So this deals mostly with I guess the resolution and remediation process, which makes sense. But there's another practical element which I think is not covered, which is essentially notice periods. Because thinking about it from the business perspective, if you, for example, there was a problem encountered, somebody's in a critical role, and you know you go through this process after which it's decided that okay, they're going to be asked to leave or they're going to leave. Where does the notice period fit into this? Because presumably you have to also, the other reason for a notice period is to identify suitable candidates to replace the person.
Yeah. So that's a very good point. So are you asking where how does this interact with the legal notice period, or more with the practical side of the notice period, like finding a replacement? Which side?
The practical side, because I mean, in various groups, obviously you've got people who fulfill roles that need to be replaced. So you have to have. I guess I'm asking from a practical side of the business. When do we start replacing the person effectively?
So, if my answer would be, so if we have
because if you're adding the notice period on top of that, then it's not 6 months; it's now 9 months or something.
Well, our notice period is 4 weeks, I think. So it's a month. If this was the 6-month process, then I would think that way before 1 month, or at the latest around 1 month before the end of this process, you could say, well, where are things going, and on balance of things, decide let's try and start the recruiting process to see if some great candidates come about. I don't know. I don't really have an answer to that.
Okay, I think that needs to be clarified, because I mean the answer to that also I think speaks to Don's question, which is isn't this too long? Because I mean if you include the notice period, then that makes sense, because it's allowing the business time to identify suitable replacements.
Just building on that as well, if someone's an integral member of the team and they're improved, that they're performing well substandard for 6 and now potentially 7 months, that could have a very serious impact on the business.
So what?
That's it.
Yeah, there was somebody raised a question about that.
I think Don almost touched on it, and then I think Robin expanded.
There have been cases like that in the past, and my